Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. In today's video, I have a Bigfoot encounter from a hunter who had a visual sighting of 3 Bigfoot creatures in Washington back in 1982. Not 1, but 3. He's the winner of the Bigfoot sighting lottery, I would say. I've heard a lot of hunters in my day and my time looking into the subject that say they have spent however much time out in the deep wilderness and have never seen or encountered anything to lead them to believe Bigfoot is real. Therefore, it can't exist, it can't be real. However, when you go online and you start digging through reports of encounters, it is quite astonishing as to how many hunter reports are really out there. There are a lot. A lot of hunters, young and old, new and experienced, have come across Bigfoot while out searching for game. And more often than not, it completely changes the way they view the outdoors. They thought they knew everything and that they had it all figured out, and then they run into one of these things or multiple of these things, and they're completely blown away and become totally intrigued or obsessed with the topic of Bigfoot. Or, they swear to themselves that they'll never venture out into the woods alone again. Either way, the stories you can find are absolutely fascinating. The thing about hunters, I should say the thing about experienced hunters, is that they have a really, really keen eye for wildlife and the identification of that wildlife. They know the fauna, they know what kinds of animals are supposed to be out there in the areas that they're in, and they know what bears look like. If you're out shooting stuff in the bush, you have to know what these animals look like. You need to be able to identify exactly what you're pointing your rifle at, let alone shooting at. And hunters are very observant, so when they say that they saw something that wasn't a bear, they usually know what they're talking about. Anyways, this gentleman saw 3 of these Bigfoot creatures back in '82, and I can't imagine being in his shoes having this experience. Let's get into it. I grew up in Skamania County, Washington. That's in the lower central part of the state. I spent my youth hiking and exploring the woods with my father. I had heard of Bigfoot sightings growing up and remember a story in the Skamania County Pioneer newspaper about a deputy sheriff seeing one and them getting a cast of its foot. Anyway, I didn't believe at all in them because I had covered a lot of dense forest land and never saw anything or heard anything. My father told me he found a footprint when he was in his 20s hunting. It was in a patch of snow. He said it was kind of old, but he said it wasn't anything like he'd ever seen. It was about 18 inches long and maybe 7 to 8 inches wide with toes and a deep impression, but I still didn't believe in them. And like most people, some of the crazy stories about UFOs and Bigfoot in them, and some of the characters that tell the stories, make it easy to make fun of it. So I've never told this story to anyone, except one old-timer who was a trapper who's seen them several times. Here's my story. It was hunting season in the fall of 1982. I was around 21 years old and hunting an area in the eastern Skamania County called the Nestor Peak area. It has an old fire lookout on top of the highest peak, which is no longer in use. It's pretty rugged country, even though it's not all that far away from some small towns. I had scouted the area several weeks prior to hunting season and saw a lot of sign and tree rubs, and about 3 days before opening morning, I saw a beautiful 4-point buck checking its rub. So opening morning, I got in there about an hour before light and waited about half hour after light. I heard a loud snap and some loud rustling in the brush, but I never saw anything. The area I was setting at was at the top of a ravine or a small draw with a road and mountain behind me, and the other side of the ravine was in front of me with a deep rugged canyon behind that. After a while, I decided to hike over to the other side and see if there was any fresh sign. As I got toward the top of the other side, I heard a lot of noise and something going over the hill toward the canyon. I approached slowly, but I never saw anything. But there was this god-awful smell in the air. It's hard to explain, but it smelled like a wet, old, musty dog that had rolled in some cow manure, but really strong and stinky. It was not pleasant, to say the least. I thought maybe it was a bear, because I've smelled bear before, but it was just different. The next morning, I went to the same place and I waited. I heard noise down the ravine a ways. A few minutes later, I saw something walking up the other side of the hill. I thought it was a bear, but looking through my scope, I could see that I was looking at a gorilla-type animal. It didn't really look like a gorilla, but that's all I could think of. It didn't seem real big. I was probably 80 to 100 yards away. Its head was wide and tall, its arms were big, but they didn't go past its knees. It had thick hair on its back, the top of its head, and legs, and it was thinner on the chest and face. I moved and kneeled down behind a stump and picked up my binoculars. It heard me, and the noise it made was unreal. Like a cougar scream, but just different, and it dropped to the ground like it was hiding. I heard more noise, and from the right came another one, which was a lot bigger. It leaned down by the other one, and it stood up and looked right at me. It was much bigger, probably 3 feet taller than the other one. It had a lot of hair on its shoulders, hanging down, and it was thick. Its face was not that covered, and through the binocs I could see its eyes were big and dark, kind of human-like, and it had a human-type nose with large nostrils. Its mouth was straight across. I saw its teeth when it opened its mouth, and they were big and flat, not pointed. I could hear it breathing from where I was at. It was loud and deep. It was lighter, and if I had to say what color, I'd say it had dark brown in places and reddish in some other places. It had huge hairy legs, but I couldn't see its feet much. The little one stood up, and they walked slowly up the hill, stopping every 50 feet and looking back at me. I would say the big one was maybe 7 to 8 feet tall, not any taller than 8, and maybe 400 to 500 pounds. Not like the stories I've heard of, 13 foot tall and 1,000 pounds. They got up to the top of the hill, and another one came up from the right. It was a little shorter than the big one and kind of hard to see. It was probably there in view, I just didn't see it earlier, as I was looking at the others. They walked out of sight and over the hill into the canyon. I just sat there and was questioning myself and what I had just saw. I was scared, but totally amazed. I left the area and went home. I wish I had my camera so bad, but I'll always have the vision in my head. I went back there about 3 days later and walked over there, where that little one had kneeled down. There was some hair on a bush about 6 inches long, not much, and there was a few footprints around. I have a size 11 shoe, and I put my foot in the biggest one I could find, and it was probably 3 inches wider and 5 inches longer than my boot, so maybe like 17 inches long and 7 inches wide. There were some huge 3-foot rocks rolled over, and you could see they dug under them, or something had, and a couple of old rotten logs moved and broken up, but really not a lot of tracks, even though I know there were 3 animals there, and no sign where they went over the bank into the canyon. Anyways, that's it, and I doubt I'll ever tell this story again. Just wanted to let you know there are real sane people that have seen them. They just don't tell.